the last hostage has returned. Unfortunately, it's kind of bittersweet because he doesn't come back alive. The body of Ran Gili was the last fallen hostage held in Gaza, was returned over here. We're towards the end of November. We're towards the end of January 2026. Right? Remember, the atrocities of October 7th was in 2023. So we're talking about already nearly 2 years and 4 months ago, nearly at this stage. Wow, what a long time period itself. There's an article on the H.com website that just came out, just reflecting about this and giving an important message, I think, from Yael Davidovitz, who's a director of outreach for Project Last Kindness under the National Association of Chevra Kadisha, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very, very interesting, and she's written over here in Ish website over here, which very detailed thing, stating over the body of Ran Gvili, the last fallen hostage held in Gaza, was returned to Israel for burial. And why does it matter so much? Of course it does matter so much. It matters to the family so much. Obviously it's very, very, very sad that he's not alive at the moment. So she starts an article and she says, Ran was murdered on October the 7th, 2023, and his body was taken into captivity by Hamas. For more than 2 years, his family waited. Obviously, it was more than that. It was nearly 2 years, 4 months. Not for hope of life, but for the ability to lay him to rest with dignity. Only with the return of this single individual could negotiations unfolding on the world stage move forward. Now, the fact alone speaks volumes. With Ran Gvili's return, every hostage, living and fallen, is now back in Israel. For the first time since October the 7th, there are no Israelis held in Gaza. That fact marks, let's say, a turning point. This is what the author says here. It closes a chapter defined by uncertainty, suspended grief, and unfinished responsibility. While obviously the national trauma does not enter it, or absolute devastating trauma has taken place at this point in time, there's something important has shifted. Israel has fulfilled its obligation to bring its people home. The reckoning ahead is obviously different now at this point in time because there's no one left behind. Now, she states over here in this article that in Judaism, burial is not a detail, it's a moral imperative. That's what's quoted. Obviously, quoting a pasuk from the Torah, which says, "You shall surely bury him on that day." This actually comes from the book of Devarim in chapter 21, verse 23. We know the Jewish tradition understands this not merely as a commandment, but as a statement about how we view the human being. The body obviously is sacred, not because of what it has done, but simply because it once housed a human soul. That value was on full display in Israel. Throughout, obviously, the 2 years, nearly 4 months it's been, the murdered hostages were not erased or forgotten at any stage in time. They were still ours. Jews around the globe prayed for them, lobbied for them. Everyone was wearing the ribbon, the special pin. People took them off yesterday evening once the final hostage came back. And we have to point out over there. So now this Mrs. Yael actually writes out at Davidovitz. She writes in this article on the H website that as a director of outreach for Project Last Kindness on the National Association of Chevra Kadisha, then NASCK, she spent much of her working hours educating Jews of all backgrounds about the importance of Jewish burial, speaking to families in moments of grief and confusion, often when no one has ever explained why burial matters so much in Jewish law and thought. You know, they say that Rav Gvili's return made that value visible to the world. So we've seen that over there. We've spoken about it so much here in the recent times. We have to point out in of itself. So it's made it visible to the whole world. We've seen the whole time not forgetting the hostages at any point in time. Personally, know of people I've spoken to that really lobbied non-stop till the last hostage came home, displayed chairs out, tents out all over Israel. And the work they did was absolutely tireless, we have to point out over there. Judaism insists that the body be returned gently to the earth because dignity does not end at death. Fire, destruction, or abandonment of the body is seen as a violation of that dignity. Burial is a final act of care we can offer another human being and is one we are obligated to provide. This commandment is not new. Obviously, in the state of Israel, they've gone to extraordinary lengths to recover the remains of its fallen so that it can be buried. The article actually over here quotes, over here with regard to Zachary Bayumel, over here. It was returned for burial more than 3 decades after he was killed in battle and he was held in Syria, we have to point out. The remains of Eddie Cohen, Hashem Yikam Damo, executed in Damascus in 1965, were pursued for decades as part of that same commitment. Ron Arad is still missing since 1986. Guy Hever has been missing since 1997. And Yehuda Katz has been missing since 1982. These are names etched in Israel's memory. We must not forget them. They represent the same unwavering promise. We do not abandon our dead, and we remember them, and it's important we mention them inside this video over here. Now, over here, Ran Givili now obviously joins this painful list of, thankfully we've got him back and he can have a burial, and obviously brings comfort to his family. He was on leave on October 7th, awaiting surgery. Despite this, he rushed to defend his people, first to go and last to return. Today, obviously, his family can finally sit Shiva, a grave can be marked, and a body can rest. At a time when human life is often reduced to numbers, strategy, or leverage, the return of Ran's body reminded us of a deeper truth. A human being is not finished when life ends. Responsibility does not, end with death. Bringing Ran home affirmed the Jewish value that the sanctity of a human being does not expire with the last breath, we have to point out over here. And that is something worth remembering long after today's news cycle actually moves on. Now, it's not the first time obviously there was other cases of Jewish hostages in Jewish history. So I think it's important just to, speak within regards to this at this point in time. I think, for example, in 1840, most famously, there was the Damascus affair, which involved detention, brutal torture, forced confessions of numerous members of the Damascus Jewish community at that point in time. There was a blood libel that was beforehand, an accusation regarding the disappearance of a monk, and over 60 Jewish children were taken hostage, and at a point in time to force parental confessions. Key victims included community leaders and women who endured terrible torture at that point in time. So we've seen all throughout Jewish history that there was dozens of Jewish community members, including women and children, were imprisoned and tortured. There was, I think, reported over here, 63 children aged between 3 to 10 were detained to compel their parents to confess. And several people died from torture, including prominent figures' wives in itself. And I think it's important we speak a bit about the Damascus affair also, because we're talking on this topic of hostages in Jewish history. So just like something is fresh in our minds, all these negotiations, what has actually occurred on the previous occasions. The Damascus affair, once again, actually the H website give over a very good example of it. Was in 1840. There was an infamous blood libel that became international news and led to one of the first instances in which Jewish communities around the world worked together to demand justice for another Jewish community. The Damascus blood libel, obviously recognized as one of the turning points, let's just say, in modern Jewish history, when world Jewry realized the importance of uniting to advocate for each other. Obviously, we've seen this since October the 7th, very much so. It was on February the 5th, 1840, Father Thomas, an Italian friar of the Capuchin order who lived in Damascus, disappeared with his Muslim servant Ibrahim Amara. They were assumed murdered, possibly by businessmen with whom I think Thomas had shady dealings, or by a Muslim who was infuriated by an insult to Islam that Father Thomas had uttered. But the Jews were to blame. You can see the anti-Semitism of Jewish history, as the Capuchins friars began spreading rumors that the Jews had murdered the 2 men to use their blood for Passover, the famous blood libel, terrible blood libel over here. This would lead to one of the history's most famous blood libels, the Damascus blood libel, also better known as the Damascus affair of 1840. Remember, I think we do a rabbinic series over here where we explore the history with regards to famous rabbis of this year. We mentioned this episode in the video with regards to Rav and Tebi, if I'm not mistaken. It was this Hilul, I think maybe around Sukkot time. We recorded a video about 3.5 years ago nearly. Damascus was then under the rule of the Ottoman Empire, and since the Ottoman Empire was weak at that point in time, the Ottoman governor of Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha, was I think primarily ruling over both Egypt and Syria as quasi-independent principalities with just nominal subservience to the Ottoman Empire. France also returned some measures of rule in Syria at that point in time. The Catholics of Syria, and they maintained, let's just say, a presence in Syria from the time of the Crusades. The Catholics of Syria, including Father Thomas, were officially under French protection. Due to the French jurisdiction over the case, the French consul Ulysse de Ratimenton, known for his anti-British views, was a terrible anti-Semite, presided over the investigation. Along with the Governor General Sharif Pasha, he conducted a short investigation, and the barber named Shlomo Negrin, among others, was arbitrarily arrested and tortured. They managed, let's say, to extort a confession from the Negrin that a monk had been killed in the house of David Harari by 7 Jews. The men whom he named were arrested and tortured. 2 of them were arrested men died. 1 converted to Islam to be spared. And the statements made under torture by others were considered adequate as an admission to guilt. Bones that were discovered in a sewer were identified as that of the monk and buried in a funeral on March 2nd, which increased, let's say, the anger against the Jews. Obviously, it was a blood libel, it was a total lie. The inscription on the monk's tombstone stated that this was the grave of a saint tortured by Jews. After the funeral, attacks would begin against Jews, and the Sharif Pasha had to move hundreds of soldiers to protect the Jewish quarter. Just on October 7th, there was attacks all over the world against Jews after that. The focus of the investigation was now on the servant Ibrahim Amara. More torture extracted the confession that he had been murdered by Jews, obviously a lie over there. Among them, members of the prominent Fahi and Pikitoto families, and the authorities sought to arrest them. Knowing the torture that they would be subjected to, some of the accused tried to hide or escape. Rabbi Yaakov Entebbe, accused of having received a bottle of blood of Thomas, was arrested and tortured, yet he held strong under the torture, we have to point out, and we mentioned about Rabbi Yaakov Entebbe, and would not confess anything over there. And more, so the blood libel spread at that point in time. As a result of the accusation was that the Jews of Damascus and other parts of Syria began to suffer from anti-Semitic mobs. Synagogues were destroyed and looted, cemeteries were desecrated, and the Jews were attacked all over the country at that point in time. News of the atrocities as they spread throughout the Jewish world, it caused waves of shock and anger at what was going on in Syria. I think the first Jewish attempt to intervene at that point in time, just like many people in the media have come out in the Jewish world to try and bring our hostages home all the points in time. It happened also at that point in time where there was loud advocacy for the return of hostages and the people. The first attempt, let's say, to intervene in the tragic situation came by a petition initiated by Israel Back, addressed, I think, to one of Muhammad as he was the governor of Syria. At the same time, the Austrian Consul General in Egypt, Anton Lurin, received a report from the Austrian consul in Damascus. He recognized the tremendous injustice. Lurin became very involved in the case, and I think he began using his influence at that point in time to petition Muhammad Ali to stop the torture methods used by investigations. Now, Muhammad Ali agreed, and instructions were issued accordingly to Damascus by express courier. As a result, the use of torture came to an end, I think, in April 25th, 1840, which caused a new round of riots in Damascus. The accusation of murder and blood libel remained. An investigation against the Jews continued, albeit without the torture. Now, I think Austrian Consul General Lurin tried to influence the Consul General of France in order to, let's say, order the subordinate Ratti Menton to stop the libel, but this was unsuccessful. And at this point, Lurin went against all procedures and decided to send information he received from Damascus to Baron James de Rothschild, the honorary Austrian consul in Paris. Baron Rothschild appealed to the French government to stop the injustice. When his appeals to the French government were ignored, Baron Rothschild chose to turn to the media and publish a report in newspapers worldwide to create public pressure to stop this anti-Semitism and travesty of justice. His brother in Vienna, Solomon Rothschild, worked alongside him and used his influence to speak to Chancellor Clement von Metternich about the situation. Metternich ultimately supported the Consul Lurin, since the negative publicity, let's say, for France, arch enemy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was to his benefit. The British also chose to support the Jews in fighting the libel, and the British Consul General of England in Egypt expressed those policies. We have to point out, as a result of the advocacy, a message was sent to Damascus in May the 3rd, 1840, ordering protection for the Jews from the violence of Muslim and Christian mobs. There was a worldwide reaction, just like October 7th area, which coordinated the Jewish response. Western Jews in Europe and America were incensed at what was happening in Damascus. European and American Jews lobbied their governments to intercede on behalf of the Jews of Damascus. in what was that an entirely novel approach. 15,000 Jews in 6 American cities gathered and protested on behalf of their fellow Jews in Syria. Primary among those Jews who were advocating on behalf of the Damascus Jews was Sir Moses Montefiore, one of the most famous philanthropists in Jewish history. He, along with a French lawyer and the future French Justice Minister Adolphe Crémox, and also Lord Loewe and Solomon Monk, traveled as delegation to Egypt to appeal to Muhammad Ali. What's interesting is this Adolphe Crémox would become, I think, have an integral role in the Alliance Israélite Universelle at a later point in time. And we mentioned video on them. They requested that the investigation be transferred to Egyptian or European judges to consider the case. Their request was denied, but as a result, Muhammad Ali decided instead to have the Jews released without acquitting them. The liberation order was issued on April the 28th, 1840. The prisoners who had survived the investigations were freed. Seeing the charges would not be dropped and libel were continued, Montefiore and Crémox chose to turn to Sultan Abdul Mejid of the Ottoman Empire, since he was actual leader over the region, albeit largely powerless. They asked the Sultan to issue a decree proclaiming blood libels as false and prohibiting prosecuting Jews based on such accusations. The Sultan acquiesced and issued his decree on November the 6th, 1840. In a noteworthy act, he condemned the blood libel, stating clearly that it was completely false, and the Muslim theologians had examined Jewish religious books and found that the Jews are strongly prohibited from not only from using human blood, but even consuming that of animals. It therefore follows that the charges made against them and their religion are nothing but pure anti-Semitism currently. Nevertheless, I think for years to come, anti-Semitic websites, even today, Catholics of Damascus will continue to tell the story of the friar murder, this blood libel about what actually happened over here. Why was France over here involved in that? In the aftermath of the Damascus affair, numerous questions arose. How could France, a country that gave civil equality to the Jews in 1791 and give its Jewish population most legal rights, openly support the patently false blood libel accusations, even and allow the tortures at that point in time? Most historians conclude that the answer was national self-interest. France's leaders saw it as beneficial to maintain their foothold in Syria and felt that supporting the accusers against the Jews would work for them, which is something we have to point out. The Jewish reaction to the Damascus affair was described as a turning point in modern Jewish history, particularly for French Jews at that point in time. They were patriotic citizens, we can just say, yet when they were exposed to anti-Semitism that the France displayed in Damascus, French Jews were completely shaken up. In fact, all of world Jewry were shaken up that the blood libel of accusations, and it would throw back anti-Semitism back to the Dark Ages at that point in time. How could it be that educated citizens and modern leaders could believe and support this baseless and ridiculous accusation? And we see this nowadays since October the 7th, how governments have turned against Israel. In an act that would reverberate for the next 2 centuries, in 1846, a 2-volume book was published in Paris, written at Achille Laurent. Relation Historique Affairs was written in 1842. The documents, I think, complete protocols of investigation of Damascus, and yet, let's say, completely omitted any mention of extensive use of tortures and only focus on the Jewish as murderers, and that the blood libel was a proven fact. Protocols were published in German, Italian, Arabic, Russian. The book, I would think, would allow anti-Semites to prove that the murder accusation had been proven, documented, but that the Jews were released despite their guilt. They were totally innocent, the Jewish community was, and you can see the aftermath over here. One of the end results of the Damascus affair was its awakening of Jewish awareness for the need, let's just say at that point in time, to cooperate and address Jewish needs and respond to charges and attacks against Jews around the world. In the following decades, I think for the first time in modern history, multiple such organizations would form over there at that point in time, but there was hostages taking place at that point in time. There was also other notable cases. The Talmud records that even, many things, various articles. I think there's a famous case of a hostage case of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg in the 13th century, who was taken hostage by the Emperor Rudolf I and held ransom for 30,000 marks, equivalent of $1 billion in those times. I would relieve everyone to learn about that specific case in of itself. But thank God all the hostages are back now. And please, everyone, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and watch over all other video content that we've got. Have a great day, everyone.